You have to tell the people that it's going to be 8 years till we're back to Earth.
If I tell the passengers that we are stuck up here and the food is running out, I'm going to become the next all-you-can-eat buffet.
Hello, Avenue 5. This is Mission Control. Is everything okay?
Yeah, everything's fine.
How can so much light feel so dark?
I agree.
It's my TV show. Why does he agree with everything that's said to him?
You hate agreeing.
Exactly.
Your sister died in space.
I can't look up at the sky because it just reminds me of her, so I can only look forward or down now.
It's me. Welcome back, Iris. Restoring Smart Seat to your default settings.
Are you calling me from the toilet? When I do that, I'm a goddamn animal.
Sorry, we're heading into the sun. The big yellow cancer factory made out of lava, that one.
Burn or starve?
Well, it's nice to have options.
You know, I think I preferred it when it was chicken or fish.
The twilight of the moron tyrant is upon us.
I'm just a happy bride.
I say we sit here and wait for death. Pray for death. Some combination of sitting in death. Sorry, I'm just internalizing a lot of panic and fear right now. But now I've done that, and I'm back in the room.
Good.
Hello, passengers. This is ATX TV Mission Control, and we have some excellent news to share with you.
We sure do. A long-awaited return of HBO's original comedy, Avenue 5, is right around the corner, and we have the captain of the proverbial ship, creator, showrunner, writer, director, producer, and satirist, Armando Iannucci, here today for a very special conversation.
Before we dive in, I'm Jen Morgan, Director of Programming for ATX TV, and this is Caitlin McFarland, co-founder of ATX TV, and we'd like to welcome you aboard. If this is your first time joining us for one of these virtual conversations, you're in for a treat. Fans of his previous series like Veep and The Thick of It can tell you that there is no one else doing it quite like Mr. Iannucci does, with quite the same linguistic flair, and this show is no exception.
Starring comedy and ATX TV favorites Hugh Laurie, Josh Gad, Zach Woods, Jessica St. Clair, and so many more, Avenue 5 follows a luxury space cruise ship 40 years in the future as its captain, crew, and passengers face a few, well, unexpected hiccups.
After 2 years away, the crew is back for season 2 on October 10th, just a few days from now. So make sure that you're caught up on season 1, which is available to stream right now on HBO Max.
That's right. And be sure to catch new episodes Mondays on HBO and HBO Max.
And now we'll turn it over to our moderator, Clark Collis from Entertainment Weekly.
Hi there. My name is Clark Collis. I'm a senior writer at Entertainment Weekly magazine. And it's my huge pleasure to be talking today and to be introducing Mr. Armando Iannucci.
Hello.
Hi, how's it going, Armando?
Good, yes. I suddenly realized I've got Post-it notes from idea sessions from season 1 of Avenue 5 that 2 years on, I still haven't taken down.
Are there any, could you think of one that you didn't use that's still up there?
Yes, there's one there that says religious war.
Well, I don't want to, I feel you may have spoiled season 3 already.
No, it doesn't get better than that, a religious war. I think it was based on the idea that they thought for fun, they ought to do like an Olympics, but for teams, they would just get into their various religions. So it would be Jews versus Hindus versus Christians versus Muslims versus Buddhists versus atheists. But then they start getting very competitive.
Well, I want to talk to you about this later on, but things that happen on Avenue 5 do have a habit of turning up in real life. So perhaps we should be grateful that religious war was crossed off the list for season 1.
Oh, God, because I know what's coming in season 2.
And how did because, this is, you've worked on, you've directed 3 films, you've created and worked on many TV shows, but they've all been literally earthbound. How did the idea to do a sci-fi comedy come about?
I've always been a huge fan of sci-fi literature, H.G. Wells, Asimov, Arthur C. Clarke. I've always, grown up loving those sci-fi programs. I like hard sci-fi where there's no magic. People don't teleport and have aliens who, for some reason, have a very good American accent. I like it when they obey the laws of physics. Battlestar Galactica, the reboot, is one of my favorite shows of all time. So I've always had a yearning to do something in the sci-fi realm. And really, after Veep, I was looking for something that was more about, how we behave, getting away from the intricacies of politics. How does society behave, really? And anyone who writes sci-fi will tell you, it's not about the future, it's about now. It's just taking something that is prevalent now and just turning it up to full volume and seeing what happens. So I wanted to look at something about how society works. And I thought, well, it would be quite good then maybe to have an environment in which, as it is, 6,000 people have to start again in terms of working out who's in charge, what are the rules, how do we work as a society? So that's what it is really. It's more a kind of soul-fi, as in social fiction, as sci-fi. I've just come up with that now, but wish I hadn't.
And is it, the production design on I'm not in any way besmirching the production design on your previous shows, but I'm assuming it is easier to sort of turn on a penny if, it's essentially people in rooms that already exist. Whereas with Avenue 5, you have to construct all this stuff and then, having paid for its construction, presumably use it. Does that make it harder to improv or to change plots? If you want to?
No, because in fact, something we found after season 1, our set went on fire. So that at least allowed us to rethink the set. And very much season 2, we're a little bit further on in the voyage. They're all stuck up for 8 years. We're a little bit further on. And I said, actually, I want a little bit more claustrophobia. So, we've subtly brought the corridors in a little bit narrower. People are just bedding down now, making their rooms their own. It's like, it's fine if you live in a hotel room for 2 weeks, but if you have to live in there for 8 years, you'd sort of want to rip out all the labeling and the branding and make it your own, really. And in season 1, if people were all still in their kind of holiday gear on their way to the pool or the spa or the casino, season 2, I said to them all, imagine you're stuck at an airport and there are no flights. It's that air of kind of people being, so there's that. And we did break it up into smaller little combinations of people, and we see whole new elements of the ship we haven't seen before. But again, it's all about intimacy. Season 1 was all about what's going on outside the ship with coffins spinning around it and all sorts of matter. Season 2 is very much about what's going on inside, people coming to terms with having to cope and seeing who, mentally and emotionally manages to do that and who don't, really.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to spoil it for anybody who hasn't, any unfortunate soul who hasn't seen season 1. But remarkably, coffins may not even be the worst thing that are spinning around this spaceship in the middle of.
No, yes. So a coffin is ejected, but isn't ejected powerfully enough, so it's caught within the ship's own gravitational pull and ends up orbiting. And I was very glad, not long after that episode out, the science consultant on Star Trek got in touch and said, yes, she was up all night doing the math, and it works. It works. It checks out. Again, we've got to obey the laws of physics. And again, in season 1, there is an unfortunate explosion where lots of human matter is ejected in space. And this is really because I went round the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena with Hugh Laurie, and we were asking them about, how do you insulate astronauts from radiation when they're on long journeys to Mars and so on, which can take, 18 months to get there and so on. And they said human waste. It's a very good insulator from radiation. And so, this is what Elon Musk doesn't tell you, but his ships will be caked in human matter.
I now have this vision of me in the apocalypse encouraging my fellow survivors to cover themselves in human waste, and they'll be like, "So who told you this?" I'm like, "Well, do you remember the thick of it? Do you remember Veep? That guy told me in an interview once that I should cake myself in."
Well, when the engineer at the JPL in Pasadena said this to Hugh, and I looked at each other and just went, "No, there's an episode."
Absolutely.
I kind of believe it. I kind of believe in doing the research, to be honest, even though it's set in the future. You know, I did want to ask them, you know, where's it going? What is, you know, how do we get there? How will it work? Because I wanted to get the kind of the physics right, really.
And like so many of your projects, this has Avenue 5 has an amazing cast: Hugh Laurie, Josh Gad, Zach Woods, Rebecca Front, who you've worked with, you know, for a long time now. At what point in the creation of the show or writing the scripts do you start thinking, "Oh, this would be great for Hugh Laurie," or "This would be great for Zach Woods"?
Oh, well, it actually started as a vehicle for Hugh, because I worked with Hugh on Veep, you know, when he arrived as Senator Tom James, and ultimately President Selena Meyer's nemesis. And we, you know, we had a really good time, and I said to him, you know, after HBO very kindly, when I moved on from Veep, said, you know, "Do you want to do something else?" I said part of the reason I stopped doing Veep was just the jet lag, the kind of, you know, my home's just outside London. We didn't move as a family, and I was trying to base myself as much at home as possible, but the jet lag was completely befuddling my head. And they said, "You can do your next show, you know, in the UK." And I said, "Well, that's perfect, because I want to set it in space. So I don't need to travel anywhere to do it. You know, I just need a studio." And I said to Hugh, you know, "Are you interested in this idea?" We had the idea of a kind of cruise ship that then gets stuck with him as the supposed captain. And yeah, and he instantly loved the idea, and really, you know, had tremendous faith in me, which I'm very touched by, to just get on with it and be able to make it with him at the front, really. And that's how it started. So he was there right from the start, which is why, you know, the pair of us ended up going around the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, asking very, very learned and distinguished scientists about human matter.
It's fascinating to me, because I know so many people in America would have been introduced to Hugh Laurie through House, and are probably now thinking, "Oh, he can do comedy as well." Whereas, you know, you and I know him. I mean, I certainly grew up watching Hugh Laurie and Stephen Fry, and to me, it's like, oh, I mean, it didn't surprise me that he could do drama, but that was to me is and was the career turn, and Veep and Avenue 5 is sort of him coming back to his natural hunting grounds, as it were.
Yes, and we also played with the idea that not a lot of people in America knew that he was actually British, and we incorporated that idea into his character in Avenue 5, in that he is a Brit pretending to be an American, pretending to be a captain, when in fact he's just been hired as an actor to provide reassurance. The ship is automatic, really. It doesn't need a kind of, until things go wrong.
And then Josh Gad is so perfect as the egomaniacal, bumptious, idiotic owner of the spaceship. How did you come to cast him?
I'm not going to say because he's playing to his strengths, because as you've described it, that sounds like I cast him because he did a taping. He came, you know, we'd set the ball rolling with castings, and Josh, who I knew had expressed an interest in working with me, did a taping, and I saw it, and it was brilliant. I just thought, well, there's Judd, and he's really funny, Josh, and smart, and, you know, knows how to picture, because it's always a danger that someone like Judd can become a kind of because he's the person who's responsible for the whole mess, you know, he's sort of not the bad guy, but the point of our kind of animosity. But you also want to feel for him as a person, you know, and Josh is great at humanizing a grotesque such as that.
And then you shot season 2 of Avenue 5 under, you know, during COVID, under COVID conditions. What I guess it's a stupid question to some degree, but what was that like? I mean, not fun, I imagine, but...
Well, no, the idea was to try and get it as much fun as possible because we're making a comedy, really. And if you're not having fun or feel in a light mood, then, you know, you're not going to give it your best. It was hard in trying to work out how we do it. And then when we do it, or when we did it, we actually had a false start. I think 1 year into COVID, we started shooting. And we got about 2.5 weeks in, but actually we were just into the second wave. You know, we had thought it would all be done by then. Clearly, no. You can't reason with this thing. It has a life of its own. And after about 2 weeks of it, 3 weeks coming up, we just thought there are so many people getting it, it's going to be impossible. And we shut down. So that was just before Christmas of 2020. And I just said, look, there's no point opening up again in the January of 21 because we'll just go through all this again. So I shunted it by another 6 months. And even then, and I thought by then, surely it'll be over, but it wasn't. So there we are, still with masks, testing every day, distancing, keeping the numbers down. But we had enough of a system by then. And we all, as a cast and crew, we all knew each other really well from season 1. So it was just being like with a group of old friends again. And we managed to find a safe way of rehearsing. You know, there's a lot of organic rehearsals take place where we get the scripts, but we play around with it and we bat ideas backwards and forwards. So you need to feel free to kind of play with each other. So we had to find ways of doing that. But it worked, and we all, you know, it was as if we hadn't waited 2 years. It was as if we'd just picked up a week after we'd finished shooting season 1. You know, and it was just great to be back in it. And actually the shoot itself flowed beautifully. I mean, we had enough going on that if for some reason someone caught it and had to, you know, isolate, we had enough plans to switch to something else to do while they were, and we didn't miss a day. We didn't, you know, we finished on time. We didn't have to shut down. And that was good, and it kept the energy going, the momentum going, and we had a good time.
It's interesting that you talk about, you know, having a good time, shooting it, because I mean, I've got a theory that the people who make horror films actually do have a good time making them, and people that make comedies, and I guess I'm more talking about films now, but seem to have a horrible time making them.
Well, I don't know. This is something I picked up from Julia Louis-Dreyfus, who said, you know, she was always the first one on set and the last one to leave. And throughout it all, even if we were shooting at 3 a.m. and we're all time, she'd be the first one to galvanize everyone and get them going again. And she said, because you've got to be in a good mood. If you're not in a good mood, you can't do comedy. You know, you can, but it just won't have that extra spark, really. You know, she's a trooper, and that was a good, you know, it's always worth remembering. It's like, which is why when I cast, you know, I have a no asshole rule in casting, which is no matter how good someone is, if we know they're going to be an asshole, then this isn't the place for them, you know, because you have to be a team player, and you have to be into that collaborative, and be able to enjoy yourself, really.
Is it?
And this is a cast of non-assholes. This is an asshole-free cast.
Well, thank goodness that doesn't apply to interviewers. I hope I'm not misremembering this, but do you also have a sort of rule that if, you know, you read a script and it says dinner, you scratch it out and put lunch instead?
Well, if it says dinner, outside is dark, I scratch it out and I either say dinner in the summer or lunch, because I have an aversion, having done 4 seasons of Veep when we did this kind of strange kind of thing of like you carry on until it's done, and if that means you go on till midnight, you go on till midnight, but then you don't start the next day until noon, so you've got the, you know, the turnaround time, so you end up shooting the entire episode in the middle of the night. I vowed never ever to do that again. So, you know, at 6:30 or occasionally 7 p.m, if it's not done, we stop and we just pick it up the next day. And it's far more civilized, and strangely, everyone's happier.
Oh, I'm sure.
So where possible, where possible, I try and avoid night shoot. I mean, night shoots are great if they're adding something to it, but if it is simply because it says here they're having dinner, we have to convene at a cold Baltimore warehouse at 3 a.m. I will kind of be a bit more creative with the script and suggest they're having breakfast or something.
I was going to say Veep. Avenue 5 returns to HBO on October 10th. What could you sort of give a little tease as to what viewers can expect?
Well,
and obviously then what the world at large can expect from real life happenings 6 months later.
Well, yes. Well, I mean, we're now about 5 months on, and fairly early on we established that Captain Ryan, Hugh Laurie, still hasn't told the passengers they're stuck in space for 8 years. So there's that. We introduced new elements. We see that on Earth, a TV dramatization of what they think might be happening in space is really taking off and getting enormous, attention. Iris is down on Earth as the main kind of focus of trying to elicit public sympathy for a rescue mission. But the issues that come up in the season are to do with, fiction versus fact, the fiction going on Earth and the fact happening in space, and both of them affecting each other. Democracy, there will be an election. Fascism or authoritarian rule, that's emerging. There's an outbreak of there is a touch of cannibalism, but insurrection. We will see the passengers beginning to now decide to take control. There's that, and there's also a missile gone astray, heading for them at some point. So actually, yes, and we also find out the inner workings of, we mentioned the Office of the Other President in season 1. We find out what that is, and the involvement of the big tech companies in running the world. So
I had the pleasure of
all of this paints a pretty picture of what awaits planet Earth the next 40 years.
I had the pleasure of watching the first couple of episodes, which are terrific. Every bit as good as, if not better, as season 1. I really enjoyed it.
We got a real sense we'd kind of really found our groove when we all reassembled, and so season 2 is the pace just goes up several gears, which is fun.
And I did thoroughly enjoy, as you say, there's a dramatization on Earth, which is sort of, I guess, and there's also a sort of news show on Earth that looks like something out of MTV.
Yeah, viewers' comments kind of live. So there's that, news being driven by what it is the viewers want to see. It just becomes very, very annoying for anyone. Anyone like Iris who wants complete control and certainty to have to deal with.
Well, what I particularly enjoyed, as you say, that there are commenters. I mean, it really looks like less a news show than, like a streaming YouTube thing, really deliberately so. And the commenters have the most deliberately, I don't know what you put it, ridiculous or stupid names. And I look forward to rewatching the episodes and more thoroughly.
Yes, we spent a lot of work in the final stages of post-production when we're doing all the vis effects and the graphics and so on. We put a lot of work into additional comments on the side and the handles that they had. There's hundreds of them go by, and they go by quite quickly. But if you do stop and pause, you will be able to read them all.
And in taking you back, if I may, when did you? When did you decide, or when did it seem possible that you could make a career in comedy?
Oh, I didn't decide I could make a career in comedy. I kind of decided I liked to try comedy, and it took me about 20 years at least before I realized that I had fundamentally was making a career in comedy. But it never feels like a career. It just feels like going from one project and then thinking what the next one might be. It's only once you've done, I suppose I've been doing it for about over 30 years now. It's only when you reach that stage you realize, oh, it has been a career. I mean, when a lot of my contemporaries are taking early retirement, I'm thinking, oh, I suppose I've done a career. but I don't want to stop. You know, I feel I'm now only just getting started. But it's never something you set out. I think you would go crazy if you started off as a sort of 20-year-old thinking, I'm about to embark on a career in. And I didn't really know what it was going to be. I just knew comedy was the center of it, but I didn't know whether it was TV or writing or performing or journalism or radio or whatever. I just wanted to make funny things and see where they went. And there was no back of an envelope plan. I mean, I did this radio show on the hour in which Alan Partridge, the sports presenter played by Steve Coogan, emerged. And that grew into a TV show, and Partridge grew into a kind of, Partridge is still going as a comedy character. So that took me into television, but it was no plan really. It just kind of evolved from one project to another.
And as you say, I mean, the first time I sort of came across your work was on The Hour. No, yes, was the Day to Day, which was the TV version of, you did on The Hour, and then the TV version, The Day to Day, which was a fake news show, which people sort of compare to The Daily Show, but where The Daily Show is really taking on the politics of the day, which The Day to Day did to some extent. The Day to Day was really parodying, and it was fully scripted. It was parodying the architecture of
yes, it was just as CNN and 24-hour news was kind of emerging, and this sense of an authoritative news channel where all the the idents were kind of slamming and going 20 today, everything is important. And it was that sense. And Chris Morris and I just twigged that if you said everything absolutely straight, it could be the biggest load of rubbish you can imagine, and yet people somehow took it in. And it wasn't meant to be topical. It was just a hanger on which to hang our kind of slightly surrealist jokes. But I don't know when this is going out, but there's a run on the pound at the moment in the UK, but people have been sending each other. We did, one of our first stories was the Bank of England loses the pound, and it's substituted by the Queen's eggs, but it's done in that authoritative business news kind of way with graphics and charts and whatever. It seems to have come round again as a storyline in the real world.
Which is both, I saw that, which is both, I mean, you're overjoyed that a show like that still has resonance 30 years on, but also incredibly depressed that it has resonance 30 years on. I remember the Day to Day had these fabulous fake headlines, or Chris Morris who was this sort of Uber presenter, would announce these things. And I was working as a music journalist at the time, and we would sometimes borrow the headlines and turn them into questions. And one of the headlines was, and I'm going to mangle it, but there was a politician called Michael Portillo who did have sort of a plasticine face. And one of the headlines was, small girl says Portillo's face feels like guts. And we would ask quite famous people what they thought Michael Portillo's face felt like, partly in homage to the Day to Day.
I have it somewhere next door. I still have the front page, a mocked up front page, where it just says Russia elects cobweb.
Oh, that's fantastic. And then, I mean, I'm passing over many things that you did, but one of my favorite shows of all time is The Thick of It, which, like the Day to Day, was, I mean, The Thick of It, for those who haven't seen it, was a show that I mean, it was the predecessor to Veep, and much like Veep, concerned politicians who didn't really have much to do. I mean, were lesser government officials, and it was sort of detailing their mores and sort of general unpleasantness, really, I guess, to some degree. And like the Day to Day, I remember watching it and sort of thinking, are they allowed to do this? Like it just seemed sort of like there should have been a law against, not that it was, I mean, it was provocative, but not that it was.
Should I have been allowed to, or should the politicians have been allowed to do it?
Those are two very different questions. But I meant it seemed that the show itself seemed sort of risky and groundbreaking. I remember. Did you have a sense of that when you were doing it?
I mean, sadly, a lot of it is based on fact, and again, it had a habit of slightly preempting the facts. the first episode has a minister on the way to make an announcement, and then he's told that the Prime Minister has not authorized the policy because there's no money. So he's going to have to announce to the national press some policy that doesn't cost anything, and they've got 45 minutes in the back of a car to think of something up. And various public cabinet ministers and subsequently have told me they've been in the back of that car when they've suddenly had to think of something. But also, I asked the cast to improvise stuff while we were filming in the back of the car. Within 5 years, 3 of the policies they came up with were actually law. So, that's the depressing state we find ourselves in. And we also found this when we were researching Veep. There isn't time. The idea of people spending a lot of time really thinking through the pros and cons of any initiative or announcement or spending policy. The way it works is there isn't time. So you have to decide then and there. I remember somebody telling us, and we did this, we explored this in the loop. If you're not in the room, you're not in power. If you, Madeleine Albright taught her staff when she was Secretary of State what she called bladder diplomacy, which is how to go through an 8-hour meeting without leaving to go to the bathroom. Because if you left the bathroom, they might decide something while you're gone, and then you're not part of that. So she taught her staff how to just sip water in very small sips and never ever kind of feel the need to leave.
And then you did, I hate to use the phrase spin-off, but essentially you did a spin-off film, In the Loop, which was, just fantastic. And amongst other wondrous sights has Peter Capaldi facing off against James Gandolfini. Two very different characters on screen, and actors from very different backgrounds. What was it like? Yeah. What was it like, sort of directing that scene and the film in general?
Both of them nervous of each other. James Gandolfini was a huge fan of the thick of it, and he plays a Pentagon general in the film. So he was nervous of meeting Peter, and similarly, Peter was extremely nervous of meeting, the wonderful James Gandolfini. And we wrote them a scene, the one you mentioned, because we realized actually we had these two characters, but the way the story works, actually, they don't actually need to meet at any point. We thought we can't have the whole film without them meeting. So we wrote a scene where they meet, and it's one of the most quoted scenes in the film. But plot-wise, it doesn't do anything to the story. It's just basically them meeting each other and talking to each other in a kind of increasingly elaborate series of insults, and then moving on. But it's an interesting kind of lesson in narrative, in that you could have an emotional plot development that's different from a kind of factual one. So in terms of the story, nothing new happened in that scene. And yet somehow that scene was the climax of that whole kind of preceding hour leading up to it, really.
And you have, success in the UK with The Thick of It, and then you do Veep in the States. I can sort of, I don't really know what I'm talking about, but I can imagine it being relatively easy for a British actor to pop over to the States and do, 3 days on a dinosaur movie and come back. But like how, that just seems like to put on a TV show in a country with which you're still at that point pretty unfamiliar, I would guess.
No, it was, I had to go into it without thinking that, really. I was a huge fan of HBO. One of my all-time favorite shows is The Larry Sanders Show, which HBO made. And I was always a huge political geek and followed American politics in quite some detail. Had just shot In the Loop, so we'd done a lot of research in the State Department, Pentagon, and so I was very familiar with it. And HBO came after In the Loop and said, we've been trying to do a Washington show for a while. Do you want to have a go? And I went away and thought about maybe the vice presidency is the best place to put it because it's so near and yet so far. So you have that continuous kind of delicious dilemma of being out of power, but if something happens to whoever's next door in the Oval Office, you're the most powerful person in the world. So people can't really diss you, even though they're laughing at you a little bit for being ineffectual, because you might be their boss tomorrow. So there was that. But yes, I and it was British writers. It was all the Think of It writers, Think of It directors. We wrote it in the UK. We shot it out in America, but we came back and we edited. All the post was back in London. So I kind of thought, well, we'll give it a go, but I'm sure people are going to hate us for it because we're coming into another country saying, what idiots, your system's crazy. And it wasn't about that. It was about trying to kind of look at the dysfunction, because the United States Constitution is predicated on two different parties being able to compromise. That's the only way things can get done. But if the parties decide they're not going to compromise, then you're stuffed, really. And so that's what we were kind of looking at, really. But in fact, I actually found, America is a very generous, inviting, open country where they just want people to come and if they can do good things, do good things. And a lot of people, American audiences, said to me, it maybe needed someone who wasn't in that partisan two-party system, growing up in a Democrat household or a Republican district or a Democrat state or whatever. Actually, someone who's outside it, being able to kind of step back and see, what the real problem is, and make something entertaining out of it. So I came out making the pilot of Veep, thinking, well, this will be 3 months of my life. It'll be interesting, and then I'll come back to the UK and carry on with the next thing, not realizing that actually I'd be there for the next 5 years. And it was fantastic fun. Still in touch with the cast and people there. It was such fun, and we were so we felt so kind of satisfied with what we'd managed to make out of it. I wouldn't have not done that for the world.
And it should be pointed out that a lot of people, you work with people, with writers who have done things before working with you. A lot of the people you've worked with have gone on and created their own shows. Jesse Armstrong, who you've worked with a lot, worked on Succession. I interviewed Will Smith, not the actor, but the not the Men in Black actor. But he created a show called Slow Horses, which I absolutely adore, and was then stunned just before interviewing him when I Google searched him to realize that he played a sort of toffish role as an advisor on The Thick of It, as well as being a writer on Avenue 5.
Where we very creatively gave him the name Phil Smith. Yes.
How do you watch Succession? Do you sort of keep?
Oh yes, I love Succession. Yes, but a lot of Veep and Avenue 5 writers are on Succession. Tony Roach, John Brown, Georgia Pritchett. There's lots of UK writers are on Succession who've worked on Veep and worked on Thick of It. So, we're kind of, I wouldn't say we're sister programs, but in terms of group teams, we're kind of sister teams, as it were.
And could you talk a little bit about your own future plans? It was announced recently you've got a project with Sam Mendes, is that correct?
Yes, this is the franchise. This is based on, I think Sam had just come off doing 2 Bond movies back to back, and we were talking about, franchises taking, Bond's a great franchise, but the idea of, you can't go to a theatre now without it being some, number 5 of a carefully calibrated, elaborately worked out 17 feature franchise plan. And what is it like, especially as a young director, because they now tend to hoover up young, interesting, hot young directors and then just grind them into the into the kind of formula that the studio wants and then spit them out. So what's that like? So it's a sort of, it's a kind of plea for, more independent cinema, but also having fun at the idea of very, very kind of experienced actors spending most of their time in leotards shouting at a green curtain.
And when,
just,
appreciate
what is
early
it
days.
like?
Sorry, go on.
what is a day of that like? You know?
I know it's one of those things that you used to hear people say, well, I'll do one for them and one for me. But now it seems to be I'll do one for them and then another one for them. And you know.
Well, you have to sign a kind of, I say I have to do 17. Okay.
And then could you talk a little bit about the future of Avenue 5? You hope to make a third season? And
yes, I mean, it's you know, HBO have a thing of they never recommission shows until the current show starts going out. So, you know, that question, those conversations will be had. We start going out October 10th, so we'll be having those conversations not long after that, really. We're all up for doing more. Because of the long delay with the pandemic and so on, all the cast had been released from their big contracts. But I kept saying to people, don't read anything into it other than we just felt we had them imprisoned in a sort of limbo. And everyone's got other projects they want to go off and do, including myself. So we're all doing our other projects. But, you know, if HBO want more, we will all get together and work out the best time and the quickest time which we can do more. But yes, I've certainly got ideas for, you know, how it will carry on.
Well, I would certainly love to see more. As I said, I loved the first season and I've loved the 2 episodes that I've seen of season 2 of Avenue 5, which does premiere on HBO on October 10th. Sorry, I'm not used to dealing with so many numbers. I'm more of a but I'm afraid we're out of time. It just leaves me to say thank you very much to the ATX Festival for asking me to do this. And thank you so much, Armando, for talking to me. I honestly could have spent 6 hours doing this. I've been a huge fan of yours. Since back in since the day-to-day days. And you know, this has just been.
You're in New York time, aren't you? I mean, that for me, that would take me to midnight. So it'd be an unreasonable request.
Well, thank you. But thank you so much.